Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Castaldo. I'm here with three of my closest friends, and we are going to talk about Windows management with Microsoft Intune. And as I said, I'm Tyler Castaldo. I work on the Intune team, specifically on compliance, but I'm going to be your moderator today. We'll go ahead and allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's go ahead and start with Asavri.
Thanks, Tyler. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Asavri Navafe. I'm a senior product manager on the Intune endpoint security and policy side of things. So I work on a lot of our endpoint security policies on Windows and some cloud stuff as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Rizza. I'm also a product manager on the same team as these folks here. I work primarily in the endpoint security and security management space for endpoint, and similarly, a lot of the endpoint security policies and experiences that you have in Intune. So happy that everyone is here and ready to ask questions.
And hey, folks, I'm Mike Donosky. I'm yet another senior PM on the policy team. We focus on everything from security to policy. We're responsible for things like the settings catalog, the endpoint security area, all that good stuff. We've been working a lot with customers who are trying to move from their on-prem GPO infrastructure over to MDM and making sure that when they move over, they have all the settings and capabilities that they need to be successful.
All right. So thanks, panelists, for being here today. I just want to say, if you have questions for this session, feel free to go to aka.ms/ama/manage windows, and you can go ahead and leave your questions there. At this point, I will go ahead and take the first question before it scrolls away from me here. So this is a question from Richard. How are folks managing remote workers with and their devices with Intune when a remote worker is not a local admin, yet needs to add a device at home, such as a local printer, scanner, etc., for their job? I'm going to pick on Dano. Is this something that you can help Richard on?
Yeah, we can talk about this a little bit. So we have a collection of offerings coming out, or that's actually come out, called Intune Suite. And what this has is it's an add-on to Intune that has a lot of capabilities around deploying out a standard user, namely endpoint privilege management, which is a way where once you have moved a standard user, as you allude to, there's a lot of challenges with keeping your users productive and letting them continue to work on and get things done and install applications and printers and things like that. So there's kind of two options there that I can think of that just immediately come to mind with the suite. The first one is, of course, using EPM, so once you've moved someone to standard user through EPM, you can create a collection of rules that describe what that user can do. And within that, you can say like, okay, they can install this app and things like that. And there's a whole roadmap of additional capabilities coming to EPM. But the other thing you could do is use something like remote help. And remote help would be an option where if you just simply need a help desk person to get in there and install printers and things like that the user doesn't have standard user access to, then that's where remote help will come in. Now, if anyone else wants to sort of add to that or chime in, Laura, I don't know if you want to talk about Universal Print a little bit.
Yeah, well, Universal Print is a service within Microsoft that allows customers to be able to use printer services, sort of with like follow me print scenarios, and without having to be like hardwired or connected to the specific printer that you're looking to use. We do offer settings within the Intune settings catalog to be able to manage which specific printers users have access to. So there are options to configure a policy related to Universal Print. So that's another way that you can sort of manage the access for printers through that service.
Cool.
Awesome. So thanks for that clarity on EPM. It's awesome to also and exciting to hear that there's more to come there in the roadmap, as Mike alluded to. Also, the ability to manage printers is something that's already there, as well as the ability to provide help remotely is something that we've spent time on, something that we've built into the Intune suite as well. So awesome to hear that. We'll go on to the next question. This is from Frank from the tech community. Is there a plan to add an executable to make integration to Intune easier? Currently, with the current procedures, GPO, work/school login, it would simplify the experience to have an MSI to install Intune. Any plans for this?
Nothing that I'm aware of, and I don't fully understand the scenario. Is this for, maybe you can clarify if this is for Company Portal, but you can also install Company Portal through as a required app, and so Intune will install it for you. But if you have more information, please put that in chat, and we can pull that information out, or we can add, hopefully more fully answer the question. Yeah.
Yep. You can add more detail to your question there in the tech community section, and we'll be more than happy to answer it. If we're not able to get to it live today, then we will definitely continue to follow up and answer questions even after the session is over today. We will keep monitoring that channel for about 24 hours. So feel free to go ahead and add more details there, and we'll do the best we can to answer that question, provide more clarity there. All right. So from Andreas, what is the best way to solve conflicts in Intune regarding configuration profiles and security baselines?
I can start with this question. I'm sure Mike will chime in. So from a guidance perspective, we have a couple of different ways that you can enforce settings through different policy channels on a device. In terms of a starting point, we do recommend customers to use the security baselines that we surface within the Endpoint Security Blade. Those are templates of settings that have been curated by specific security experts, and we do support different versions of ones from the experts that we work with. So folks in Windows team and Defender team and the Win365 team and Edge, there's a whole list. They will curate templates of recommended settings and the values for those settings to set down on devices. Within there, you do have the option to customize away from those recommendations that come built into the policy template and then target that out as you would as any normal policy. But because the templates might not cover the full scope of settings that you want to enforce on a device, we do recommend customers can use other options like the endpoint security policy templates that we have for like AV, firewall, etc., and then fill in some of those gaps with a settings catalog policy that is the sort of shopping cart experience where you can fill in, again, any gaps or make sure those devices have additional targeting of settings. So that is great from a guidance standpoint. When it comes down to reality, we do hear the feedback and know that customers may get themselves into trouble with overlapping settings that are coming from these different policy types. The way that we've made some strides to improve this is actually investing a lot in our reporting experience. So we are doing some consolidation on the policy types to make sure they're working with the same underlying infrastructure that'll help avoid conflicts and eventually get to a North Star point to solve them. At this point, as I mentioned, we've made some investments in our reporting. So the consistency of the setting names, the values, the documentation that it links to, those are made to be consistent now, and baselines specifically are in progress and have made some improvements to get to that consistent infrastructure. We do have specific reports like assignment failures and overhauling the reporting experience to make it easier to identify where conflicts occur so that you can go back to the source policies that are causing those. But we don't yet have a mechanism to resolve conflicts if there are overlaps happening. So I would urge people to take a look at the reports to understand where they're happening, so you can sort of figure out where you might need to make tweaks, and know that we are making changes on the back end to get those all in a consistent place so that they are showing up easier for you to identify. In terms of conflict resolution, I know that is a very long-standing ask. I'll let Dano speak a little bit to that, but we sort of approach this in a twofold way. One is like the identification and prevention, but obviously the ideal spot would be for resolution, which we haven't necessarily gotten to yet.
Yeah, and I can pick up from there, Laura, a little bit and talk a little bit more about some of the conflict stuff. So just to put a fine point on it as well, the new baseline is coming out at the end of March. We've moved to, which if you're watching it live right now, that's in about a week or so, with some change. So one of the things that people sort of encounter is if you have two policies that have the same setting with different values, that's essentially will create a conflict. There's a lot of the investment that we did behind the scenes so that a lot of the settings have the same names, have the same values, things like that, even in all the way out to reporting and stuff like that. We definitely hear the feedback that it would be nice to have some sort of way to layer. What happens today, just for folks, if you do have two policies that are in conflict, the first setting that hit the device will win. The second setting that gets deployed will fail and not take effect. So this is like if say that you have a setting turned to off for everyone, and you actually have it enforced to off, and then you go turn it on for a setting of users. Those machines will stay in the off state. Any new machines won't get a setting for that policy or for either policy because they'll conflict, and we don't know how to manage that or resolve that conflict before we send it down to the device. So those devices won't get policy. So conflict is very important to avoid while we sort of look in and investigate what we can do to give folks a better option to resolve that without saying, create a group of the exclusions, add it to the exclusion, clone the policy, make the change, add that exclude group to the include group for the second policy. That's really the way that folks are doing that today. And then you multiply that out on every permutation of those policies that you have, and it could get a little bit tangled. So it's definitely something that we're looking at, trying to figure out how we can address.
All right, thank you for the insight on dealing with configuration policy and security baseline conflicts. Let's go ahead and quickly move on to a question from Ramiro. Is there an option for adding shortcuts via Intune where it publishes those shortcuts on all user desktops?
I don't think so. I think this is something that used to be in GPP, group policy preferences. But as far as I know, there's no way to do it with like a setting where you would just like point to a file and have it create a shortcut. There may be something clever you can do. That I've maybe seen people do with like running scripts, but there's no like native Windows setting that I'm aware of that lets you just pin shortcuts. There is some things you can do to pin things to the start menu, but not shortcuts to the desktop.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you go through like the apps workflow to add a web app on Windows platform specifically, it limits it to the start menu, which is not obviously the whole desktop or home screen there.
Okay, so partial option, but thank you for addressing that one, Mike and Asavri. All right, so our next question, anonymous. Our team is working to call out restricted user access for cloud device access through thin clients. Recently, we found that the multi-app mode and kiosk mode inside Intune do not work without logging into the thin client with an Entra ID. Is the recommended way to do this without having an Entra ID on the local device to use assigned access configurations or XML files? And do you have customers who have experience with Intune managed thin clients for multi-app usage?
Good question. I can answer this. So this is getting into within assigned access. So for folks who might not be aware, assigned access is the CSP that governs kiosk mode in Windows. Assigned access within the CSP has some configurations for logon type. one of them is a local user or local account, and one of them is using an Entra ID. That's about where my knowledge goes depth wise. And I have seen people be successful using the Entra ID for that login. I don't think you necessarily specify the exact user. You're just saying that this person's going to be using Entra to log in, so that it supplies that prompt. For more information, I would definitely check out CSP. There's some good examples in there as well of XML. And if there's an option in there that isn't supported in our kiosk mode template, which has a lot of the options that are available for kiosk mode, the second part of the question referencing the assigned access configurations in XML, that will work, especially for, it doesn't matter if it's a thin client or any client. You can create that through a custom OMA policy targeting assigned access, and then injecting the XML in there, which is has a special name for it, but I can't remember it right now. I think it's provisioning XML or something like that. But what I would recommend is if you're going to do that, start simple, maybe just try and get it to do the login before you start adding other things to the XML. I've spent days troubleshooting those XMLs, and they can be tricky. So it's definitely good to start simple and then expand out from there and experiment with it a bit before you sort of just, craft the whole XML and then find out that it doesn't work, and then you're troubleshooting from there. So that's just a little advice and some thoughts around the assigned access CSP. But I think it works.
All right. So thank you for the advice and for the guidance there, Dano, on that particular scenario. So we have a question from X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. What can you do with BitLocker management in Intune?
I can answer that one. So we have a lot of capabilities for BitLocker management in Intune. So to start off, obviously, with ability to enable encryption on your fleet of Windows devices. So you'll probably have noticed that we have a dedicated BitLocker profile under, I believe it's called disk encryption in the endpoint security node.
I can pull it up if you want to talk to
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. So if we switch over to the shared screen, I'm over at Endpoint Security for disk encryption.
Yeah. So under disk encryption, well, we do support cross-plat, so you might see a Mac one there as well for Windows specifically, since this is a Windows management session. You'd have to go ahead and pick the Windows platform, pick BitLocker, and go ahead and create that profile. So the settings, put in your standard profile info here. The settings that we expose here are essentially all the settings that the BitLocker CSP exposes as configurable in the MDM world. So there's been a lot of work done to make sure that we're trying to get as much parity from GP to MDM policies here for BitLocker specifically. So it should have most of the settings, if not all, that are supported. And essentially you can configure the level of encryption that is required within your organization. So, use-based versus full volume encryption. You can configure the algorithm used. You can configure which drives you're interested in going ahead with encryption for, so fixed drives, system drives, etc. There's also the key escrow configurations that you can make, which are tied to, for cloud joined devices would be an Entra ID. So tied to the device or Entra, we tied to your device object. So that's another configuration you can make where you would require key escrow to happen before BitLocker encryption completes or starts on the device. And then another kind of scenario you can enable here is silently enabling BitLocker, which is really important to customers. The idea is that enables encryption to start and complete without user intervention. So it's more of a consistent experience across all of your devices within your organization without expecting any user interaction there. So yeah, there's a lot of options here for BitLocker that you can go ahead and configure. But that's just one piece of what we are enabling with BitLocker management in Intune. Once kind of your profile has been set up here, you can monitor encryption as well. And that's through an encryption report that we provide. And that's kind of goes over all of your devices enrolled in your enterprise, and I calls out which of them have been encrypted successfully, which profiles are assigned to them, etc., which is really helpful for reporting out on kind of what the state of encryption is within your organization. And then lastly, what Intune helps with for BitLocker management is just recovery key management. So this is a lot of joint features with Entra. Essentially the ability to provide help desk specific roles and permission folks with those permissions to view their recovery key. So if someone calls to help desk and wants to see their recovery key, they'll find that that's there. They'll find the ability from an admin perspective to be able to do a key rotate as well, which is important from the kind of key management perspective to specify specific devices and trigger a key rotate from a security side. So yeah, at a high level, configuring policies here, monitoring encryption through reporting, and then recovery key management, kind of all things you can do with Intune.
Awesome. BitLocker management and monitoring in Intune for the win. It's awesome to see those capabilities that are moving directly into Intune. So just a quick time check. We are in our last 9 minutes, but don't despair if your question does not get answered on air. Continue to go to aka.ms/ama/manage windows. Leave your questions there. We will continue to monitor that chat over the next several hours, and we will continue to find answers there too. Even from folks who might not necessarily be on this panel, we will be working offline to make sure that your questions all get addressed. All right, so next question from John on Tech Community. I've been searching high and low to find out when or if Intune Remote Help will ever allow for unattended remote access to an Intune device, specifically Windows devices. This is a very important feature that's currently missing. So I'd be interested to learn what other users have deployed.
I don't know the answer to that. Potentially we could find out in 8 minutes and circle back. Actually, you know what? We'll come back to that one in Tech Community and give an answer to it and give it the full answer it needs instead of me randomly searching my inbox. So
absolutely. We'll find the right expert. We will get the right answer to that one. Thanks again for the question. We will definitely address that one. So question from Todd. I guess 38 minutes, not 8 minutes. Awesome. All right. So a question from Todd. Are there any plans to support group policy preferences and the item level targeting functionality in Intune?
I can talk about this. So group policy preferences has a list of various capabilities. The ones that we hear about most frequently are registry settings, scheduled tasks, turning Windows features on and off, mapping network drives, and there's a few more in there. The number one that we hear feedback on is setting an arbitrary reg key. Oh, I think shortcuts and printer installer in there as well. But the number one that we hear about that's blocking folks is registry keys. What this turns into is folks are using scripts or remediation to end up setting these if there's no ADMX or there's no native setting for it. So we are looking at which portions of group policy preferences we can work hand in hand with the Windows team to go build as first-party CSPs over on the Windows side, and then utilize them in Intune by sort of like giving this exact feedback from these types of events and things like that. So if folks have specific group policy preferences that you're looking for or scenarios, please pile on here on the if this is in the tech community and give some more information. Also, we've got aka.ms/Intune feedback. So if there are certain scenarios that you have or group policy preferences that you are looking at and you're missing sorely, please put them into Intune feedback as well. We collect all these areas of feedback and try and make sure that we're building the product around how folks need to use it. The item level targeting functionality, filters would be the moral equivalent of item level targeting. And with filters, you can go in and create filters and target and attach it to a policy. So you may be able to say, I want to assign this policy to all users, except my filter will say only run it on Windows devices that are running Windows 11 or something like that. So filters is the moral equivalent of item level targeting. And then I would assume the feedback there is that we need more in filters, which of course, again, aka.ms/Intune feedback. If you have feedback around filters, or if there's some item level targeting scenario that your business requires or your customers require that we don't have a capability for before. Maybe it's a blind spot for us, maybe it's on the roadmap, or maybe it's just coming out soon. But it would be good to get that information so we could give you a full answer.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks. So yeah, go ahead and provide additional feedback in our feedback portal. And again, you can always add detail to your questions as well. And we will go back and make sure to address those specific items that you have. More specificity would also mean more specific answers. So absolutely, we encourage you to go ahead and provide as much detail as you can. We'll be able to address that. Okay, question next from Russ. Do you recommend using endpoint security settings or configuration profiles where the same settings are available in both areas, for example, BitLocker or encryption?
I did speak to this a little bit. So I was talking before about the different policy types that we surface within Intune. So baselines, again, is the curated templates with recommendations from security experts. We have also the settings catalog policy. That's sort of a shopping cart experience where you customize and sort of build your own policy from the thousands of settings that we surface within the console. And within the endpoint security blade, we have curated templates for the settings related to different scenarios on security workloads. So we do have sections within there for antivirus templates, for exclusions. We have dist encryption BitLocker template that we just walked through. Same for firewall, account protection, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason that we have those sort of curated in a template is because they are related to the specific scenario. So the general guidance and recommendation would be to leverage those templates if you are looking to configure settings related to that scenario. However, there are cases where we do surface the same settings through settings catalog so that you have the option and flexibility as you're building out your own custom policy to include those with targeting devices that might need those settings. We do take into account that there are specific scenarios that should be in a template if you're looking to configure settings that are related to each other. One example is the local admin password template that we recently released last year. So that is a group of settings that are sort of connected to each other for the given scenario. And that is not something that we surface through the settings catalog. So it just makes more sense to configure like 5 or 6 settings together to make sure that you're successfully managing and securing devices, again, related to that workload. Coming back to the overlap, I would say that's sort of up to you. I know the question mentioned BitLocker and encryption, and I think that is one of those types where we do have some overlap. So I don't know, Sabri, if you want to give some specific insight there, but I would just consider the way that you would want to use the different policy types and be mindful of potential overlap and the reason why you might use one policy type over another.
Yeah, I think it's also about who you think in your organization is going to be managing those policies going forward. In the case of BitLocker, disk encryption, if you have a group of admins that are going to be looking after that in a dedicated fashion, maybe the template makes more sense for you. But with settings catalog at the start that Dano had mentioned, you can kind of have more than just the BitLocker settings in there. You can put in any other settings that you need to. So if that's your requirement, then that's an option there. But for something like BitLocker, where the settings are straightforward enough that they don't need necessarily a curated experience. We wanted to make them available kind of in both places, just for to meet the needs of customers using either option.
Yeah, and I'll also add to the RBAC and persona aspect, because that's a great point. There are different permissions associated with the different policy types. So admins that are using device configuration policy and settings catalog are tied to a specific permission set versus folks that are more so in the endpoint security space that might use the security templates and baselines. Those are two different RBAC permissions. So admins that have the endpoint security manager role would sort of live in the endpoint security space. So depending on which permission set that you have, that might dictate where you would configure settings related to that. But I'll also put in a small plug to improvements that are coming out in that space, is that we are moving to introduce more granular RBAC permissions within the endpoint security blade. So today it's just one umbrella permission that gates baselines and all of the templates that we see within that section. We are moving towards a model that'll be more granular for specific workloads within endpoint security. So antivirus permissions and distant encryption versus firewall, and that'll make it easier and more flexible for you to determine who has access to what, and give you more options to decide how that dictates who gets access to those policies. So stay tuned for that at some point. But yeah, we're looking to make that more flexible for you coming soon.
I want to add.
Awesome. I love the
add
flexibility. Go ahead, Dano.
I want to add just one or two more things too.
Sure.
If you go through Group Policy Analytics, which is a tool which lets you take your GPO and upload it, that has an option to create a settings catalog policy off of that. There will be some portions of that where we'll say, hey, instead of creating settings catalog, you're going to be better served going to endpoint security, so that you can, fully configure a scenario. So just be aware of those types of things when you're going through. A lot of people used to ask, why do I have to memorize where a setting is in order to configure it? And going forward, that's kind of the idea behind the settings catalog, is it's got everything in it. But if you want to use a specific template, you can use a specific template. And then we've also added some quality of life things to some of the templates. So for example, firewall rules, you can add reusable groups and then reference that reusable group of firewall ports and ranges into your policy. And that way, if you just have some information to add to that rule, instead of going and touching all of your firewall rules, let's say you have a new app that has some new port requirement, instead of going in and touching every single firewall rule you have, you can just go to that reusable group, add the information there, and then it'll pull into all the other policies that you have that reference that group. So that's the kind of stuff where we'll add a little bit more quality of life stuff, maybe some different reports and things like that in the endpoint security area. And then long-term, we are looking at ways that we can bring some of that endpoint security goodness back into device configuration. Initially, as Laura was alluding to, saying, hey, you have a security persona, someone who comes traditionally from working on security products, use RBAC and give them access to endpoint security so they can manage your firewall, your BitLocker policy, maybe your security baseline, stuff like that. But then what we want to do is, as that's sort of a subset of all of device configuration, we want to bring some of that goodness back into device configuration at some point. So it's less of a going forward, and you'll also see with the investments we've made, like the setting names are going to be the same across in both areas, and the values that are available will be the same in both areas as well.
All right, so flexibility, consistency, all these things that we have and that are continuing to come in this space to provide you with all the options that you need, as well as more granular permissions. So just to be clear, we are going for another 26 minutes. So continue to keep your questions coming. So go ahead to aka.ms/AMA/manage Windows, and we'll continue to take questions up through the bottom of the hour from where I live. And so yeah, for another 26-ish minutes or so, and then we'll continue to answer questions offline as well. All right, so next question is from Andre. We use co-management authority to enroll our devices as co-managed. our finding is that this is not really reliable. Looks like there are timeout issues there. Where can we tweak the enrollment process to make it more stable?
You're using co-management to enroll, and there's probably more to this question as well. So my first sage advice is just open a support case if something's broken and timing out. The other thing is I would say if you're using co-management with autopilot and hybrid Azure AD, that is a recipe for having strange timing issues. I've seen it where getting populated into that, especially if you're in co-management and you're in that middle section, getting populated into various user collections and configuration manager in order to get that thing working will take some time as devices start to check in and become known and figure out, should they have their management authority be configuration manager, or should they have their management authority be Intune? Any two combinations of those things work pretty well, but if you have all three together, that's a non-recommended configuration to have both autopilot and co-management with hybrid Entra join. So there's not a lot of information in the question. I'm just taking some guesses out there. If you're seeing timeouts and things like that, and you're seeing weird timing issues, definitely go through, and I think there's some recommendations in the docs on try to help that, as well as open a support case and get some help on some of those enrollment timeouts if it seems to be like a happy path type enrollment method that you're using. That's my best answer with the information in the question. And then if there's more information later, again, like Tyler had mentioned, we'll have the questions open for 24 hours. So if there's more info, we can always come back.
All right, thank you for the insight and that guidance. So our next question is coming from Lee from the tech community. Are there any plans to have Windows driver updates through Intune respect the active hours for the devices, or is there a hidden setting somewhere that I might be missing?
That is a good question. We'll have to follow up on.
Okay. We will follow up, and we will definitely give an answer there to Lee on this. All right. So Brandon asks, our organization is trying out the passwordless capability as part of the authentication policy CSP, but we are struggling with some of the functionality. What is the reasoning behind forcing in-session authentication to the built-in local administrator account and not allowing the opportunity to provide another account with local administrator access to authenticate? Lapse is great and it works, but it's hard to track down who actually performed that action, aka retrieve the lapse password from Entra. And EPM requires additional configuration, doesn't currently check all the boxes, and most importantly, comes at an additional cost.
I'll chime into part of the question that mentioned the lapse functionality. So we do surface some of the auditing events for, I think, things that were mentioned. So I would double check on that because I'm pretty sure that we do surface events for who retrieved the password from Entra, things on like the manual policy rotation. And again, like we capture that within the auditing section that Entra does surface. So I would check to see if that is available for you to use. But the other part of the question on authentication policy CSP and EPM, I might leave to some of the other folks here. But hopefully that can be a short help to use the lapse auditing.
I think one thing I'd advise against, so you do mention adding an additional local admin account. Those can become tough to manage is the feedback that we hear from customers. So that's where lapse is the way to sort of provide that. We think of it as sort of more of a break glass than anything else. This shouldn't be something that folks are regularly using. If you're in an environment with standard user, that is where we get into EPM territory. The note about requiring additional configuration, this is something that we're looking at in threefold, both ways that you can have better reporting on elevations that take place in your environment and what folks are failing to elevate or successfully elevating many times, so that you can tune your rules so that you're running more as a steady state. The other thing there is allowing for easier rule creation based off the reports or additional tooling so that you can say, here's a known path, just make this a rule because it's already showing up on my reports. And then the third thing, which is something that's launching again, just in a few weeks here, in like a week and a half at the end of the month, is support approved. So if you have EPM today, you can put it in either allow or deny for a rule. And going forward, you can put it in allow or deny mode. And then there's a new mode called support approved, where when someone tries to do something that there's not a rule to control, or it's they're trying to do something that they don't have elevation access to, when they go and try and do that elevation, it will create a ticket, if you will, that goes into a support approval queue where someone can reason over it, see what the elevation attempt is trying to do, and then they can approve or deny that request. If it's approved, the end user will get a notification that says, hey, you've been approved to do this thing. And then they have 24 hours to finish that action. And so that is a way where if you don't have your configuration absolutely dialed in and you're kind of concerned about whether you're ready to move to a mode where you're going to be a little bit more stricter enforcement with EPM, where a lot of people will start with just like allow everything in audit so I can see what's going on. And then they'll say, okay, I'm going to start locking this down with users that aren't elevating a lot. And then once you get to the point where you're going to lock down more, support approved is sort of not exactly the break glass that people use laps for, but it's a way that you can still help folks in a funneled way where anything they're trying to do is going to turn into a support approved task that someone can go reason over and either approve or deny. So it's a little bit easier to make sure that you're not blocking your users from getting their work done. And I also don't know exactly about authentication policy CSP, so we might have to follow up on that one in text.
Yep, we can definitely do that. So thanks, Laura. Thanks, Mike, for the insight there and how we can keep our users productive. So, all right. David asks, when BitLocker is enabled silently via Intune, does the recovery information automatically get saved in Azure?
I believe I know there's a specific setting that requires key escrow to happen before encryption. So you probably want to make that one enabled as well. I'm trying to find the name here. I can just reply in the chat, but there's one, I think it's like require key escrow before encryption or something like that. So you want to have that one probably turned on to make sure that key escrow happens. And there's also obviously the prerequisites to configure silently enabling BitLocker, which I believe we have docs on as well. But you want to basically turn the warning for other disk encryption to off or disabled. And you want to make sure that the obviously required device encryption setting is set to enabled. And that's specific to using the endpoint security profile that we shared earlier. So I believe if you kind of require that key escrow to happen, you should see that there is a key escrow key generated and provided and saved in Entra. And you can confirm that by going to the device in Intune and seeing that key is there if you have the right permissions to view it from a BitLocker perspective, from a permissions perspective. And then because we were talking about auditing earlier, all of those views of the keys do also get audited within audit logs as well.
And I'll plug as well. BitLocker can be a little tough to configure. There's a good blog series out there in the customer success blog that talks about some of these very specific settings and how they should be set, or how, based on what outcome you're trying to drive. There's also a few BitLocker settings I believe it's in the Defender baseline that we support as well. That'll just sort of get you off to the races with some of the quick recommendations if you're not really sure where to start.
Great. It sounds like there's something that doesn't necessarily happen automatically, but it is something that is configurable if you go through and do the right settings. And so it sounds like we have some guidance available for that. So that's great. So question from Benjamin. In what situations would you require an Intune device-only license SKU instead of assigning licenses to users? What about for co-managed devices?
I believe that this license is for devices in which there is no user. So your kiosks, your anything that's userless, like a device that's a shared device in a classroom or something like that. I believe that's what it's for, but I'm not fully deep in the area. I don't know, Laura, Savri, or Tyler, if you happen to know any more information about that.
Yeah, I think we have some guidance in our documentation on the different scenarios that you might find yourself in related to licensing. The device type made sense to me, but I'm sure we can pull up some specific guidance to go deeper into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever have any questions also around licensing, my recommendation would be to go ahead and talk with your account team. If there's anyone, if you have a marketing contact, go and talk with them. These are the ones who really need to figure out how to package our products and how to make sure that we're providing the right licensing and can help to provide the guidance as to what specific licenses you need to be most effective in your environment. All right. So more about or guidance around using BitLocker with Intune. More information is available at this link right underneath Mike Donosky, aka.ms/BitLocker with Intune. Will allow you to go to a blog post or blog series, which will help provide guidance in real world scenarios in using BitLocker and configuring it using Intune. So I'd highly recommend, if you have any questions on BitLocker, to go ahead and check out the information we have there. Of course, you can continue to keep the questions coming as we continue to roll on through our AMA session today. All right, Matthew asks, what's the best way to force an immediate sync from the client side? Making changes to Intune is always slow to affect changes on a specific machine. When I have a user on the line, I prefer immediate results. So I'll actually go ahead and attempt to answer this one. The best way to do an immediate sync from the client side is to actually go in and click the button, whether it's in the web CP, the company portal website online, or whether it's in the client itself. That is the best way to do that. In some cases, I know, at least for compliance, you can't always do a full sync from the admin center. So actually having someone, if you do have someone on the line, telling them to actually go through and kick off that sync themselves is the best way for success. So that's my thought. I'm not sure if Laura, Mike, or Savri have any additional thoughts on that.
That's spot on. Anytime you do a sync, we send all policy and all app requests. So if it determines that there's like an app out of date or like a new version of a policy available, it'll go and remediate that. Something else you can do is while you're in there, that's where the export all of the help logs are. And maybe you can look at some of if there's like something that's stuck. When you're in there on worker school account, and then you click on the join and then more info, and then you have the sync button. I believe it's on the right side of the page. There's like collect export logs, and then that'll give you a nice cab file with all of the troubleshooting information you may need in case you end up opening a support case. But yeah, clicking sync is the best way to do it. We sync once every 8 hours. We also will send a push notification if we detect that there's a change to a policy. You also should be syncing on device boot. We'll do a device check-in, and then when a user logs in, it'll trigger another check-in. Right after enrollment, for the first, I think, 15 minutes, you check in every 3 minutes. For the next, I think it's 2 hours, it checks in every 15 minutes, and then it will definitely check in every 8 hours. So we definitely try and make sure that any changes in policy come down to the device. And then I'll also note that coming out this month is a new feature from Windows that we're supporting in Intune called Configuration Refresh. What this will do is a 90-minute replay of the previous commands that were received. So if someone's going in and changing registry keys, or they're changing settings and things like that, maybe it's in a troubleshooting mode. If you turn on Configuration Refresh, the default is 90 minutes. It will go through without talking to Intune. We'll just replay the last set of commands that the device received. So it'll go reinforce all policy across the machine. It's configurable up to 24 hours and down to 30 minutes, and then has a pause option that will come out as well. So that's just helpful for sort of helping get away from maybe some drift, especially during like troubleshooting scenarios, or if you're going through and making changes on the device and you want it to snap back. So quick plug there for Config Refresh, which sort of helps with some of this drift that can take place on devices.
Cool. Awesome to hear about new functionality to help to make sure that the policies that are on the device are actually matching what was pushed by the admin, and to help to eliminate some of that drift as well. And also, just to clarify, that sync that Mike is talking about is available through the settings app within Intune. And you can go into your accounts there, go into work or school, and then there's a sync button there as well, in addition to in the company portal, where there's also a sync button. So a couple different ways to do it. But if you want the specific troubleshooting logs that Mike was talking about, that does go through the settings app on the device. All right. So from Rushikesh, how do we manage local user accounts that already exist on a device? Is it possible to remove extra users from the device and only keep cloud IDs and backup admin account?
I can take this one. So we were talking earlier about the lapse functionality that is available within Intune. That is what you use to manage the local admin account, which cannot be removed by design. So you can use the lapse settings to manage that built-in local administrator. But we also have the option to configure settings to manage the local user accounts that are on the device using the local users and groups settings that are available within the Endpoint Security blade. So there's a specific template there that services the settings that come from the same named CSP within Intune. And from there, you can configure and choose based on the built-in groups that are on a device. So we have like admin, cloud, or desktop user. There's a whole list. I can't remember off the top of my head. But then you have, sorry.
Do you want me to pull it up real quick?
Sure, that'd be awesome.
Local user group membership.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. So if you go to local user group membership.
And this is under account protection.
Yes. Under account protection, Windows 10 and later, you can go ahead and create the policy for this, and you see the options that we have. So this is where you would select the local groups that you want to manage the users based on, and you can actually select more than one, which is pretty cool. And then choose based on those groups that you're looking to manage. There's 3 different options for how you want to manage them. You can add, update the users on that, which means adding to the existing set that might already be there. So this would be whatever's there plus whatever you choose to add. You can do a replace, which will sort of wipe all of the users that are in that group and then replace with whichever ones you choose. And there's also the option to remove updates, so removing specific ones that are already there. Once you choose the action type for the groups that you've selected, you can choose to do this in 2 different ways that'll influence the next step. You can choose the specific users and groups that are available, or you can do this manually. So if I do this manually, I come to the add users section. That'll open a blade that will allow you to put in a list of the specific users that you want to take that action with. And there's a couple of different formats in which that is supported. You can see them listed there. And then there's also some links to documentation on best practices for that. So if we want to replace and add Tyler instead, we can do that. But if I come back to the user selection type, and I wanted to do this for users and groups, once I open this section, the blade will come up with the group of Entra users and groups that you can choose from there. What's really cool is that I can also build a lock into this specific policy template. So I can add multiple rows for how I want to manage all of those groups, and then send it out from there. So lots of flexibility. This comes from the underlying Windows CSP capabilities. So that would be the recommendation for how you want to manage those local groups. But then again, coming back to the built-in local admin account, you can't get rid of it, but you should manage it using LAPS. So we have all of that functionality available for you.
I'll sort of put a finer point on that as well. Like when we're talking about EPM and we're talking about local users, a big question that comes up a lot is like, how do I actually, cool, I'm sold. How do I actually go ahead and set people to standard user? And that would be this, is removing folks from the administrator privileges. So yeah, one way to do it. There's many other ways.
Nice. And I like how, Mike, you muted me remotely so that you had to, you can still get that last tip in. At this point in time, we do need to wrap things up. I apologize there for talking on mute, but thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to continuing to answer your questions. Please continue to keep the questions coming, aka.ms/ama/eam/Intune Suite. Actually, no, that is the next session that is coming up. But feel free to continue to bring in your questions around Windows. We will continue to answer those over the next few days. So thanks to our panelists, and thank you for your questions. We will see you all later. Take care, everyone.